You ask us to go back and get a comparable pricing from an outside person for the same materials, and we have done that.
Yeah, you should see in your agenda package, we actually went to New Leaf, who's had experience with Weathermatic, as well as they're quite knowledgeable of irrigation systems. They've done golf courses and athletic complexes and such. So their pricing that came up, there was a few things that they could not get pricing on because they were proprietary to Weathermatic, which was a 48-zone flow sensor, a 2-inch flow master, a surge protection, and then we estimated their install. And then pedestals was another one that was an assumed pricing there. So with that said, I will say that New Leaf, Jacob from New Leaf, has no desire to install a Weathermatic system. He was gracious enough to give us pricing, but it was not a project that he wants to tackle because it is monumental. So you can see his pricing total from Weathermatic came up to $114,120. New Leaf was at $170,833.
So to repeat what you just said, we have a price of $170, but no desire to do it.
No desire to do it, yes. So, go over the benefits one more time if you want. Reporting is one of the great benefits of Weathermatic. Being able to monitor your water usage, control your water usage, and hopefully reduce the amount of water that we're using for irrigation. The system right now is controlled, majority of it is controlled by the CDD through their Rainbird system, and it's kind of antiquated. Rainbird does not support the Maxicom system anymore, so you have to go to third-party vendors to get pieces and parts for it. So one day it's going to be to where you won't even find parts for them anymore. So whether it's today or in the future, you definitely have to change your control system. So here's the proposal in front of you.
And one other thing, just so you know, Todd has previous experience with Weathermatic in a prior lifetime, and loved it, and so that's another master plan community that uses Weathermatic.
How long have they been around, Todd?
They came on the market, I believe, I'm trying to think when I first saw them, 2009 or 10, I believe, is when they started hitting the market.
Oh, I thought they'd been around quite a bit.
They have been in business.
From
I'm
when
looking
I
through
seen
the-
them.
Since the 80s.
Yeah, from when I had experienced is what I'm saying.
Take us, Steve, to the 10-year saving analysis table for Weathermatic.
Page 13.
As a refresher
is.
for the board, you'll remember we had the gentleman from Weathermatic in here a while ago, and we just wanted to price alternatives to see if there was a cost benefit from everything. I think where we had ended up is we had agreed that we have an obsolete system that we're gonna have to replace. Todd's correct, we can do it now, we can do it next year, 2 years from now, but we're gonna be in a crisis mode at some point in the game. We had discussed the last time with the guy, we could put 62 down or pay monthly over 3 years. There was no difference in cash flow at all, so it makes more sense to just do the 3-year model. So we had this up here, which, no, not with the 62 down, go up, I don't want that one. So basically, the way this worked is we have an annual program cost of $38,000 for the first 3 years, as you can see there, and then the $89.70 a year after that. I think we had a choice, if I remember right, on whether or not we took their insurance program after the 3 years. You're essentially making a decision about, okay, like when you buy a TV, if TV doesn't break in the first year, it's probably going to last you 10 years. So we could make that decision at 3 years. Annual water savings, based on Todd's experience, we think is actually very legitimate. You have some savings in the first 3 years, but you have peace of mind of having a product with a strong warranty behind it. And you're green, you've done a lot of good things. And then the real savings kick in years 4 through 10. So, happy to open it up for questions to Todd or comments, and then we just gotta make a decision.
I just have some questions about the financing and the payment of this. As I read the budgeted amounts, if we go back in the reserve study, for 3 years, it comes to $32,000 that we've allocated. This first year will cost us $38,000, so there's a $6,000 shortfall out of the replacement study. And then every year after that, for the first two, or the next 2 years, there's a $38,000 additional charge. Does our replacement reserve study allocate $38,000 a year for years 2 and 3 of this? Because we're actually going back 2 years now to accumulate enough, roughly, for this first year.
No, it does
No,
not.
it does not. It
So
does-
how, what, Brian, maybe this is a question for you or for the treasurer. I know you're the assistant volunteer treasurer, but what fund, what accounting bucket would these year 2 and 3 payments come from?
I think year 1, 2, and 3 would all come out of the replacement reserves. You are replacing a system. We're gonna talk about reserves a little later. I've learned a lot more about reserves over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. Reserves is an art, it's not a science. Just being painfully blunt. And the answer is, I think what you're spending money here is an asset for us in the long term. And basically, you spend reserves on assets. So,
So just to follow up quickly, assuming that we take it out of replacement reserves in years 2 and 3, as we look at the replacement reserve study, and you're gonna make that presentation later today, are you allocating, because I know there's a shortfall already, are we allocating this additional amount, which I assume would be I mean, 38,000 a year is a fairly significant number, maybe it's 10,000 that was built into the original study. So there's gonna be some shortfall each of those years.
the answer is yes, but as I go through it later, we start with a cushion. At the end of time, we have a cushion. I'm gonna show you how the thing balances out later. So, do we have 38,000 for 3 years? Yes, we have 38,000 for 3 years. To me, this is an economic decision that we should make. I do believe replacement reserves is the proper place for years 1, 2, and 3. So I'd take all 3 years out of there, because we are going to have an asset for 20 years. And I think you can correct, Todd, you get your question, and then Todd can bring his. I think at the end of the day, we have to do something. It's only a matter of when.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, I'm just asking where we're paying for it.
That's how I think about it.
Should we go over the replacement reserve thing first before, just so we understand this, where the
Well, I'm
money's
willing
coming
to take your word for it, that you've done the study. I mean, if we get into the replacement reserve discussion today and we discover it's something wildly different and there's a, math error, then.
No, I can walk you through the replacement reserve.
Can I ask a quick question? Because I'm confused when you're talking about assets and yet we're talking about lease program. So it's kind of an oxymoron.
It's a capital lease.
Okay.
So
help
in
me
the end,
understand
we
that.
own it.
Okay, so it's a payment plan. Got it.
So we own it after 3 years.
Right.
Just wanted to make sure I was on the same page. Okay, thank you.
So a couple of things. Thank you, number one, Todd, to go ahead and get the additional numbers. My challenge was that we were receiving just one bid, so I wanted to make sure that we had it priced out. You mentioned New Leaf was based on their bid as well, probably not interested in installing it. Is he comfortable using it?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
So that's a good thing to hear. The other thing that we discussed last time was possibly breaking this down and doing just a smaller area to make sure that everybody is on the same page and comfortable with it. The equipment that we're replacing is in fact the CDD's equipment and not ours. So that's something to keep in mind. If it breaks, who's actually paying for it? So that's not entirely hitting us if that equipment goes out.
I'm under the understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's fully warranted, so if something breaks, they're gonna come and fix it at their cost.
Yes.
But I'm
absolutely.
referring to the current equipment. Who owns it? CROA does not own the current equipment.
It's, from my going on 5 years here, when something breaks, Russ and I would, beat it around to see who was served most by a certain controller, because they are shared. So if we had more zones running off a controller, CROA would replace parts on it, and vice versa. So
So how did the
balanced out.
reserve study look at those different controllers?
it didn't. That was an operating expense.
I'm looking
That's
around.
a challenge.
I'm doubting that the reserve study ever look at this?
At these specific controllers, the irrigation reserves are not related to these controllers, most likely.
I would almost virtually say that's true.
It was, yeah,
I'm
the
looking right here now.
reserves were more of an umbrella for all
Right,
irrigation
right. Catch-all,
things.
catch-all.
Yeah.
It's really it's a capital lease replacement of what was a
So this
capital
is-
lease or rental type item.
This is more of a capital improvement project that we'll happen to use $32,000 towards of that replacement. And for the remaining, what is that, 80+ thousand will be a capital improvement expense over those 3 years, which is a concern because 80 grand it's a good chunk of change, especially when part of that change is going towards the fields that have brand new irrigation systems.
Would you like, in all
So-
seriousness, would you like to do reserves first?
That might help.
Because if we
To
can
make
do
sure we
the big-
know the money we're
If we can
spending.
do the big picture of reserves, I can probably answer a lot of questions because we're getting way too specific and the reserve study just ain't that specific.
I just want to make sure the money's
So
actually.
let's switch, no, the questions are very fair questions. So let's switch order. Let's go to reserves.
Are we talking about monthly payments or yearly? I see the capital leases say 3,000 a month. We're paying every
We're
month.
paying
right?
every month, it's a month.
Okay.
Does everybody in the audience have
36 months.
copies of the reserve study? And we tried to make them at a size that even I could read them.
Jeremy.
They're much bigger.
Yeah, you can see it here. Okay, thank you.
We now put everyone through the Jackson test. If you think a blind man can read it, then we've accomplished something.
It is difficult on that side of the table.
All right, what I want to do is walk everybody through the reserve study. And again, same rules as always, audience. You're welcome to ask questions, raise your hand. And I'm going to start with just, and I like to walk, so you're just going to have to put up with me walking. Megan is the engineer that works for the engineering firm we use. They have now done the reserve study about 5 times. So every 3 years. So, and what I have learned is Vaughn and I met with her, but then I had a follow-up conversation with her. I went through some methodology stuff because I was trying to educate myself because I knew enough to be dangerous and incompetent. And I was trying to really get over it because I started doing the same thing that Kevin and Jackson just did, which is going into way too much detail. And in talking to her last time, what she really said was the reserve study gets better every single time. And this time she specifically blamed Todd and Suzanne because they've now been here long enough that she comes for 4.5 days. She walked everything with them. Todd was very instrumental in walking the 851 building, showing her things she didn't even know. And then it makes their notes, they update their notes and stuff like that. Suzanne did the same thing with other stuff. So we've got an increase, and I'm going to walk you through the increase, but part of the increase is inflation and a few things like that, which I'll go through here. Part of the increase is the reserve study is getting better and better. And an example of things, though, that are affecting the reserve increase, which I'll go through in a second, is demand surge. We've had hurricanes in the last 2 years. When you start having, you remember, as you'll all remember, we really went for a period of a decade with no hurricanes. Works very well, and then when you start having a couple of years of hurricanes and all the roof replacement issues and stuff like that, it makes a big difference. There's an inflation assumption in here at 2.1%, which I will walk you through. We are now using roofing engineers. We've learned that while it costs you money up front, it saves you a lot of money on the back end if anything goes wrong. So that is an increased cost that the board made a decision to put on all roofing projects. NEVs. She said NEVs are getting very much more expensive, and that in her opinion, it would be more efficient for us to go to capital leases, which is why we've been pushing Todd to get that project done. Because when you start actually, buying NEVs, and we're buying more and more NEVs, and you start expanding the thing, these economic decisions matter. And we get questions from the audience, and this is one of them that we've had, and they're actually great questions, and they're helpful, and I think Kevin had also pushed this. Plus timing and stuff. The other thing that became very clear to me as I went through reserves is, we've seen it on some of our projects, but you think you're going to replace a roof in 2019, and you ended up replacing it in 2017, or it gets pushed back to 2021. And this is happening in service areas, this is happening at CROA. You're moving stuff all over the place. you're buying stuff early, you're buying stuff late. So this is really, it became very clear to me in the second conversation, this is really a gut feel, trying to learn as much as I can, say what might the life be, but this reserve stuff is gonna move all over the place. So I'm going to just start right here on this page, because there's some important things that really need to be driven home. CROA. So we've got CROA and we've got the service areas. When you look at the 2016 study, 606 was this year. 2020 was 615, 900, 625, 634, 644. You look at the new study, we got 805, 821, 839, 856. That's an average of 832. I've got a next page exhibit I'll walk you through, but that's essentially a $200,000 increase in reserves. It matters ahead of budgeting, because if we decide to fund to that level, and as I go through this, I'm going to talk about what that means. That's $200,000 that's coming out of operating funds. Because at the end of the day, you've all heard me, because you're all regulars here, you've all heard me say we have a revenue stream of $6.6 million. That $6.6 million can only be spent once. Whether you're talking about spending it here or here or here, we've said that we're very committed to keeping the reserve funds strong. If we do that, that $200,000 is gone, meaning it's being spent in the reserve studies. It makes us a stronger community on that side. It'll force decisions on the other side. So this is an important conversation from that perspective. As we bounce down here, and I'll start with Savannah Square here, you can see they've got increases about 2,500. I think what you really got here is you got a lot of these service areas, you've got a little inflation, you've got some engineering utilization, which is increasing these in different areas. One of the things we as a board have to decide is how this study gets reviewed with each service area, and it needs to be. And I know Jackson and Vanessa are service area people, but we've got to think about how we want to communicate this to the service areas. You take something like Academy Row, it's down a little. You can change something just about if you move the roofing up a couple of years and stuff like that. You got a lot of them are pretty straightforward. If you bounce down here to the bottom, Steve, sorry. You've got Parkview and Spring Lake both had big differences. And Oak Pond up here is 35,000 versus 11,600. That's a roofing change that of $16,000. So when you said here, you've heard me say it before, and I think one of the weaknesses of our reserving process right now, especially when I think about the reserving areas, if you look at CROA has kept a cushion, and I'll talk about our cushion up here in a minute. If you've got a cushion, you can absorb a problem, and problems are just going to happen, if we're honest. A lot of these service areas have got no cushion. So when you sit there and all of a sudden you take a 2,000, I think what happened here, if I remember right, is they took a project that was planned for this year. It ended up having to get moved forward 1 year because this is Florida and roofs age and stuff happens. And if you sat there and you haven't built a reserve in your reserve balance, and then you end up having to move a project forward for a year, you get stuck with big assessments. I understand very well that when people buy and sell condos or buy and sell homes, if you've created reserves, you can talk about the fairness or unfairness until you're blue in the face. But if you don't have any cushion, you leave everyone exposed to assessments, and you see that happening here. Parkview's got an increase of about $76,000, and when I looked at it yesterday, in the 16 study, Parkview had $431,000 in 1 year, and in 21, and had $418,000 in 22. That went up to $536,000 and $525,000 in the 2019 study. I think we ought to have Susan follow up, or Todd, whoever the right person is, on that one, just to help explain a little, because they're going to care. And then Spring Lake is even more interesting. It's got an increase of $80,000, and in the 16 study, it had $400,000 in 21, and now it's got 421 and 381 and 22. So I don't know if there was additional building that's happened. Gary's got a comment here. Go ahead.
Well, for those two, is it increasing reserves, or is there some maintenance that's been overlooked?
Now, I'm giving you expenditure numbers. So I don't know if when the 16 study was done, if Spring Lake was not done. And
It was not built out in
Okay, so
2016.
basically what you've got is you've got a much better study now, though, with an area being built out. But what has happened then is you've ended up in a situation where you're going to have a big increase in assessments, which is why I'm saying we're going to have to talk to people, because people are going to blame CROA, because that's who you blame. But I'm trying, I'll take questions anyway, but I'm trying to give you a flavor. Little things move this needle a lot. Let's go to the next page. So then, I built this. And this is CROA. So, and again, I realize that's why I gave everybody paper. So, I took all 30 years. Actually, go to the next page first. So this here, what I did here, and this is the third page, but it'll help you understand the second page. I took all 30 years, with 2009 being a case, a base case. And if you end the base case with a CROA reserve of 846,000, and again, a lot of you've seen this before, so you know how when we present the reserve balances, we'll talk about here's the replacement reserve versus working capital and those other things. So this is the replacement reserve, and let's say we end the year with 846, which is pretty reasonable. So then what I did was I actually took the study, and I broke it down into parks, pools and pool houses, Heritage Hall, maintenance building, 851 building, dog park, athletic complex, and the total. When you go down, okay, so when you go down this, you'll have all 30 years, but don't go down, Steve. Don't go down.
Don't go down. Trust.
Steve's got an impossible job. He's got to keep up with my mouth. So what happens here is they are the firm started with $805,000 as a 2020 number. And I'm going to show you how that number gets picked. It's artificial, but there's a logic, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. This increases automatically each year by 2.1%. So they're really factoring in, you've heard me talk about how I think assessments ought to go up about 2% a year for inflation. They have actually used 2.1% for inflation and increased it there. They have assumed that on our replacement balances, we're going to earn 1.7%, which I think is nuts. I don't think there's any chance we're going to earn 1.7%, but maybe we'll get lucky. So you have the expenditure here, and you can see we've got 700, 900, a million, 400, depending on what years we're doing things, all these different things over here. You can have higher years, lower years. This, they keep growing. The funding, which is coming out of our fees, they keep increasing 2.1% each year. The interest is just interest on the average funding balance that's invested going forward. So that's pretty straightforward. And if you bounce down to the bottom, Steve. Okay, so the magic of how this thing really works is, okay, over 30 years, you're spending $34,389,883 over 30 years. And in year 30, you got a big number, $2.6 million, because I really think they use 30 years as kind of the end plug type balance, because you can't just go to infinity, so you kind of plug it. Here you got the funding balance with that 2.1%, and you got the interest earned at 790. So we've spent 34,389. We've earned 33,964. So I think Jackson correctly said a while ago, that's a loss of 425. So that when you started with that number up above of 864 or something like that, you're now down to 420. Now, what I decided to do was pencil width at the top there, Steve. Is I decided, okay, I want to balance this out perfectly. Because of 30 years in the compounding, literally, if we made the decision to increase this 805 to $813,000, it comes out to zero, or like $7,000. So there's not a wild difference. So if we, as a board, said we're going to make that 813, this thing would zero out, which means when I talked about a reserve earlier, you're taking the 30 years if you start at 813, starting at 846, ending at 846. That means we, CROA as a community have a reserve balance of 846. So if we, and the reason I think a reserve balance is important is because you've said here, you've made these assumptions over 30 years, and if we wake up and there's been a hurricane, or there's been a fire at the 851 building, and you got deductibles, or you just have to take a roof or accelerate something at a park or something like that, you gotta spend that. So when Jackson and Kevin were talking earlier about, okay, is that 38,000 really, for a couple years, really out there? My answer is, no, it's probably not in this detail, and I don't want anyone to look at these numbers and say there's an exhaustive detail underneath this for every chair and for every bench and stuff like that. It's just an impossible thing to do over 30 years. So if we did spend $80,000, as you mentioned earlier, it would come out of that 846, which is why we have a reserve. And at the end of the day, we are making business decisions that affect this small block of time at the beginning, because we're not on this board for 30 years, and a lot of things are going to change over 30 years. But does this kind of make sense, the picture I'm trying to draw for you here? So you can really almost think like we got a reserve, we've got an expense revenue funding plan. It requires a commitment for this and future boards to actually put in the right month, grow it by 2.1%, because the worst thing that could happen, in my opinion, is some board sits there and says, I'm just gonna cut the funding in half because that'll balance my operating budget, and all of a sudden, you could literally be in a point of 18 months, crap, we got serious problems, we can't fix stuff up, we need to do special assessments. And when you look at our asset base, at the last board meeting, several of you saw me where I come up with the assets, and I think we need to go further and actually, as a board exhibit, say this is all our property assets. And I know Kevin had asked this question, the more I thought about it this weekend, the more I decided I agree. It would be easy to sit here, because I'm making this number, if we got $15 million worth of assets, you know, that's real, and it has to be thought about. So then let's go back to page 2. So then, and once I've done these 3 pages, then you can ask a million questions. So this 2019 study here, this 34,389 ties into that third page I just went through, which was the total expenses over that 30 years. And I said, okay, here it is. This is how much we spend on all these different areas that I walked you through before. Here's what it was in the 2016 study. Here's the increase. So you can see we've had 30% increase in parks, 26% increase there. Heritage Hall went up by 50%. It went more than by the 30 because she literally said Todd did an outstanding job of walking her through the thing and having her see things better. 851 building, 33%, blah, blah, blah. I then took the 2019 average expense, and I said, over 30 years, you know, this averages out to about $1,146,000 a year. I then took the average funding, the 830 was the average funding for the period of 2020, 21, 22, 23, which is like the next 4 years, because really we'll do another one of these in 3 or 4 years. So I said, okay, out of the $830,000 that we're going to fund, one of the questions I've had is, okay, how much goes to the athletic complex? I think $83,000. So I think we are going to fund $83,000 a year for each of the next 4 years, just because we got the athletic fields, just because of stuff that's going to roll through all those years, as you saw. Some of it will not get spent for 5 years, but then it's like your roofing project. You got to fund it over time, and then you're going to spend a lot of money. So you're doing that same thing. The dog park is costing us $30,000 a year. Parks cost us $450,000 a year. Pools, $165,000. So to me, when you'll start hearing me use the words what, because one of the things we've talked about is what is the run rate of the athletic parks, or what is, you know, you've heard me talk about the whole civic corridor. To me, this is a real cost, because at the end of the day, we as a board and we as a community have to fund that. And if it's, doesn't matter if it's paying a salary of somebody in that corner, or if it's going into the reserve balance, out of that $6.6 million of revenues we received, this is money we're spending. And so then, with that kind of as background, what I'm really saying is, okay, the reserve study to me makes sense when you look at it from that thing. I don't think you can, because sometimes we sit here and Susan will say, we wanted to spend X dollars, and it had a reserve study amount of $3,400. It has really become clear to me that that $3,400 is plugged out on an Excel spreadsheet and implies accuracy that I don't think is really there. It really is, are more things in the replacement reserve? Yes, it should be there. Are we spending replacement dollars? Yes, because as we build it up, and with the charter program, we protect these, great, and this is the model we're going to. And I realize I've covered a lot in the last 10, 15 minutes, so I'll be happy to take as many questions as you
Brian,
got.
can I just add one more thing, just to kind of help draw to a conclusion here? That when we look at this giant elephant that we're eating, every year we break it into little pieces. So around September through the end of the year, Todd and Susanna will do the presentation to the board of what the next year's projects look like, and what our best guesstimates of those costs are going to be. Then we'll go out and we'll get the 3 bids for each project, and we'll work through that and get those in front of the board. That's when we'll realize the true cost of what each project's going to be. So while this is the big giant picture for 30 years, we narrow that in every year to say, here's what the next year's projects are. Now, as they're doing that assessment, they may go out and say, that painting can wait another year, or this painting needs to be moved up a year, as Brian had described earlier. So it really is an art then as you get year by year, but it starts to make a lot of sense as you go through it year by year for the projects that you're going to be doing that year.
And the engineer did go through examples of invoices and past amounts spent and stuff like that. So, I mean, the engineer is not working at 20,000 feet. A lot of this, they get pretty detailed, and I was impressed when she explained how she walked the property with people and really looked at things from a different perspective. You know, air handlers being an example. Okay, hadn't captured all the air handlers, and that's one example, but, you know.
No roofs had been done up to just a few years ago.
16,
Right.
no roofs had been done.
I got to ask the assistant treasurer here.
You got the wrong.
Treasurer, whatever you want.
120,000 for the weathermatic, and we're talking about this in September and October. I'm not trying to throw a wrench into this, but should this be incorporated into that discussion about other projects, reserve projects that we have to deal with as far as cost goes? Do we really know what those are going to cost us?
Well,
I mean, you know what
not
I'm
to
saying?
be rude, but
Are
the
we just
past
pulling
two...
this out of place?
Right, no. The past 2 years, I've done a project update, and Weathermatic's been on that for the past 2 years. So trying to get them all lined up, be cost effective, as we keep pushing it out, it's making all that go crazy.
We've had money for irrigation updates over the past 2 years,
Yeah,
right? That
yes.
has been part of those reserve studies. So there is money there, but as Brian says, it's not a specific, this widget costs this much money. It's just an overall general amount of what it costs to do this.
Yeah.
Now, there are two schools of thought for replacement. One was, anytime you're replacing an existing system or existing amenity, you're using these reserve dollars. Anytime you're building something brand new, you're using your capital dollars.
I have 2 questions. The first is just technically, if we're looking at the $805,000 in 2020 on the 2019 study, does that include all of those service area reserve
No,
amounts?
this is CROA only.
So when we take the service areas, each one of those is handled as a separate entity. It's sandboxed off, and it has to live and support itself independently.
In the detailed file I sent you the other day, literally at the bottom, I labeled each one, and there's a expense tab, and there's a funding tab, and that funding tab, the concept is exactly the same and everything.
So, just not to put too fine a point on it, but the service areas, depending on the size of the service area, the projects and the situation, we have some service areas that are in pretty good shape for reserves, and we have some that are in crisis. And I think it's important that we be clear that when we're talking about the reserve study for CROA, we are not talking about the reserve study specifically for any of these service areas. And working with Susanna and management, we're going to have to figure out on a case-by-case basis what to do, because some of these service areas literally don't have the money to do the projects that they have to do right now, much less hurricanes. So that
No, you're 100%. That's why I said there had to be a meeting with them, and I think we have a big problem in service areas that have no reserve
Okay.
balance.
My second quick question, I see that Island Village is not included yet because we don't have any assets to actually review. As a major asset like Island Village comes on, or we might imagine a civic center at some point, when those big assets get added, what can we do to ensure that the appropriate replacement reserves start immediately, just as we're learning with the athletic field complex, that we had to do that. I think that's been a real struggle, is to figure out what the run rate is.
This is going to line up the timing pretty well with Island Village, because we'll be renewing the reserve study in 3 years. So there's going to be an increase in units, so the 4,321 is going to go up to include the Island Village units, so more revenue coming in. But right when those assets come online, when we do this renewal of this reserve study, those will be included in the
But
next 30
between
years.
now and that 3-year study, we wouldn't be allocating anything.
I think there's been a total flaw in our capital spending strategy. I mean, I've watched that February 2018 meeting many times, and never once was reserves or run rate expenses or anything discussed. And going forward, it should be, because the dog park here, at 30,000 a year. I mean, we literally should have been putting 30,000 in the dog park, because at the end of the day, if you don't do it for 3 years, then whoever the residents are starting in that year 4 have to start funding that. I mean, and that's what's happening here. The athletic complex timing just happens to work because we magically did it now. But if we put the athletic complex in 2 years ago, I don't think anyone would have caught it, and we'd have a bigger buffer to catch.
In that same vein of thought, Island Village, the school is going to be going in, I think it's August of 2020, is
They moved it
It's
back.
not pushed out a year to August
So
21.
it's August of 2021. Okay, so if that's being pushed out to 2021, will there be any CROA type assets that are going to be done around the same time as the school?
The first CROA asset to come on board, I believe, is going to be a public CROA amenity. But I'm not sure what the timing looks like now as compared to the school, because it's going to be near, the developer that's building, or the builder that's building the apartment complex is also going to be building the CROA amenity.
And then we'll be ultimately responsible for the maintenance of that.
That CROA amenity, we will, yes. It will automatically come into your assets and be part of the reserve study.
So then we need to know that August of 2021, we need to be prepared from that end to be able to maintain it.
Yeah, I'm
If
just
that's
worried
the
about
topic.
waiting 3 years. I understand what you're saying, Steve,
Yeah.
but I think if we wait 3 years and say, oh, okay, now it's time for the study, and now we're gonna put the money in, as Brian has said, we end up shortfalling ourselves. And just seeing what a difference it makes in moving that number from 805,000 to 813,000 over 30 years, a 3-year lack of funding could be dramatic.
And you could adopt the methodology of increasing on your best estimate prior to the update of the reserve study. We just don't have enough information yet of what that amenity is even going to look like.
As a footnote, you're going to be working really closely with the builder to make sure that
We
they-
have been, and they've
Well, I
had a lot of
you said the same thing
conceptual-
with Spring Lake, and we're still biting.
Well, no, I mean, I
so-
came in after Spring Lake was already on board, but this amenity, we have had numerous sit down. I think Brian's been part of them, David has been part of it as the ad hoc. They're just conceptual right now, and once they get a little bit more firm
We
understanding
have
of
as
what
much
that looks like.
confidence as we could get into county.
I'm just saying.
As a clarification on that, the reserve study is really about replacement as something wears. Sometime between 18 and 24 months, we will have that new recreation facility. That's going to be brand new. It's not going to need replacement in the first year. And if there is any repairs, that would undoubtedly be part of a warranty.
But it'll be part of a 30-year funding plan.
So the time, I don't think we're going to need to put that in before the next study.
That was why I was asking about the timing.
I think it's going to be a new facility, but we start
But that's,
including it.
that same argument is the same argument you're making with the athletic field. You're not replacing turf on day one.
No.
But you got a fund. 'cause
That's growing.
Like the synthetic turf, I mean,
You see
that's
it?
expensive when you start replacing
And
that
it's-
and stuff like that, so you're funding it over time.
And it's there every 10 years for the replacement of the synthetic turf.
Right.
That and to
That's where you
strip
get a big-
to strip the natural turf fields laser
Yeah.
level and
All
redo
kinds of
that.
stuff.
Right.
I mean, it's there. I think you got comments.
Yeah, and follows up on Vanessa's question, because I just wanted to know, I come to the early morning meetings, schools in session, and I see the kids in the K through 8 are playing on the parking lot. We are responsible for that field. Is that included in here?
We do have the upkeep of that field, not a complete tear down and replacement though, but yes, to do periodical patchwork on that field, absolutely.
So basically, all we do is a little patch patchwork.
Yeah, and we purposely didn't do strip, because that is a capital project altogether that would require a lot of capital dollars just to get the entire facility up to where it needs to be. So it's K-8 facility, since it's not yours, but you do have maintenance responsibilities, it's just being patched.
Let's go past hypotheticals. Artisan Park has talked about having a park. We've talked about pickleball courts. We've talked about croquet or something else as, projects. We should do a much better job of when we talk about this is gonna cost $250,000 of saying, okay, and based on other scenarios out here, should we be putting
Double it.
$10,000 a year
Yeah.
into replacement reserves or something like that? It should just be, it really should become part of the approval process checklist, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see it like belt and suspenders. When you give us these numbers, you also say, and we recommend X amount being put into the replacement reserve, so that we are clear on what's happening to that number and how we're allocating for it. As the community continues to grow and the capital projects continue to be big projects, that's going to put a greater burden on replacement reserves down the road. And I think we've got to be proactive now so that in years to come, the funds are there and the board says, okay, we understood, we knew this was coming.
Yeah, I just kind of want to reiterate, and I think that, when it comes in the conversation about the athletic fields, like, A, I'm really glad to see the boards are doing this. B, I think communication-wise to the community, we'd be well served if this was done and belt and suspenders kind of moving forward, because I think it creates a lot of ill will and misunderstanding, like sort of the conversation right now, we don't care about the kids or what have you. We care about people using the fields and kids and our community and the whole thing, but my gosh, there's so much to pay for, and there's so much more to pay for than we originally realized in all of those meetings. And so it's really.
And I'll say it on tape, we care about 4,321 owners. That's what we get the big bucks to worry about. And you will hear me say it many times, fields, $83,000, dog park, $29,000. Even if we're talking about dog park lights or something, I mean, you can pick something for everybody. You can pick pickleball courts, but these things, that's on. So you heard us say the soccer fields could cost $150,000 to $200,000. Well, as Nikki hires 2 or 3 people and stuff like that, we're going to have an insurance allocation. We're going to have those lights out there actually take power. I mean, it will not surprise me that, as we look at the civic corridor, that we get to a number like $150,000 to $200,000 a year, which you can argue about whether it's a person or a reserve, but at the end of the day, I'll still always go back to that $6.6 million and say, if that money's coming out of there, and if we're not, we can only spend it once. Dumb statement, but it needs to be repeated.
I think in line with your concern, Laurel, and being on past boards, I think part of the challenge is there's an innate fallacy sometimes, is if we don't do it right now, then it will never happen. And I think the purpose of some of the stuff that strategically that the board is doing now, looking forward, is to make sure that everybody knows that all the projects are going to get done. They may not get done this year, but they will get done. This is the plan. And I think as long as the future boards come in, and they kind of fall in line with, here's the overall strategy to make sure that all of the different demographics are represented, as long as everybody stays in line with it, which is the biggest challenge. But the fallacy has been, if we don't tell everybody what we're spending, then when their project doesn't happen, it will matter. So now if we go away from that and we go back to, okay, this is the real expense, knowing that going forward, we're going to still do these projects, it just may take another year than what we were planning.
And here, I go back, to me, we've had this engineering firm, we've had this specific engineer who've done this 4 or 5 times in a row, 12, 15 years. We've got the best study, it's not perfect. The important decision for us to make as a board is, what do we want for a reserve? 846 is, the guess for year end. And do we want to start at 805? Would we rather start at an 813? And this 846, when you think about a reserve, also covers that new thing that we put in place and we forget to properly do and stuff like that. I mean, we just talked about 80,000, which would knock us down to 764. Or 66, whatever. If we put in pickleball courts or something else and we forget to do it, at least you're spending reserve dollars. And as long as you got that there, we as a board member have a fiduciary responsibility, and you as a public can take comfort that we're not going to do something really, really stupid that has us in 18 months telling you, sorry, we need to we're gonna do a one-year assessment to everybody in the community because we didn't think about reserves, which is, I think, a horrible place to be. So I am a fan of having like I said, I actually would like to see the list of the properties. If we've got $15 or $20 million worth of properties, when you talk about all buildings, all parks, all everything, it's just not hard to say, we could have a $300,000 surprise come from somewhere. I mean, we all get that, which is why I like having a reserve. And why I would probably take the 805 to 813. Then we could, in good faith, tell people, we've tried to keep 30-year spending and revenues making sense based upon these assumptions. We can certainly lean on the engineer because he's got the best expertise of anybody in this room and work closely with our professionals. And this is really the reserve study.
Just
Go ahead,
mechanically, do we vote on the reserve funded amount as a separate action item, and if so, when?
In the budget process, we actually take the revenues and we show the allocation to working capital, we show the allocation to contingency, we show the allocation to replacement reserves. So that is part of the annual budget that we vote on and goes to the community for, as part of that process.
But it doesn't go by the individual line, though. You'll look at the budget as a whole.
We look at it as a whole, but it's got allocation to
Correct.
replacement
Right.
reserves.
Yeah, it's one of those contra revenues that Brian points
Yeah,
out.
No one else,
I recall that from last year.
votes on it.
Right.
I mean, this here is a decision that we as a board make and future boards make. I mean, some board in the future could say, we're gonna cut that to 400,000 because that's all we need. And
It's beneficial for me today, though, to see at least 4 heads saying that that's what you're looking for, because that's the number I will plug in and as I'm working through the budget.
And just to finish the thought, the service areas, as I recall from last year, we individually looked at their budgets and reserves outside of our CROA budget process. Am I? Yes,
I
okay.
think we've always done that.
It was approved separately, correct?
Yeah.
And then Susanna and Susan have meetings with each one of the reserve service areas to discuss those, the overall annual budget for them.
And the investments on those accounts, on the service areas, that's probably minuscule, right, as far as what they recover?
it's the
The
same
assumption
concept,
is-
but they have small balances.
It's just smaller number of units contributing to the,
Laurel?
And just a quick clarification, you made it sound as if the interest would not most likely be 1.7. Only because I'm seeing that accumulate in a way that could absolutely throw off. So is this too low or too high? Because my apologies, I have no clue what interest is on these things.
We're
All
not
right.
getting 1.7.
You'll get the Brian Kinsel macroeconomic speech right now.
No interest.
We actually look at the 846, we put some money in CDs. CDs today, you can get somewhere, if you go with shorter term interest rates, 1.5%. If you really go out to 2 years, I think interest rates are contracting around the globe, and I think the 1.7 is pretty high. I would not advocate ever having the community take risk assets area. I mean, if you take a U.S. Treasury, if you take a money market or a CD that's very secure, great, So I don't believe, 30 years is a long time. Somewhere in 30 years, could the interest rate shoot up to 10% and offset? Yes. So I mean,
That's
to
just
me,
a
the risk is
conservative
it being
thing.
high, not low.
Okay, so do you need to account for that in the sense that you won't be having that continue to increase quite in that way?
Assuming it's too high.
In a relatively impactful way, it looks like when I see the numbers sort of amortized, but
Should we make it 1.7 instead of 1.5 or 1.2?
Make it lower.
Or should we start our funding higher?
yeah, exactly. I just want to make sure that we don't get caught on something like that, which seems like
Make it
maybe
1% and
more of a given.
1% will change those numbers dramatically.
Let me do something.
30 years.
Okay.
Oh, it does change it.
we're going to budget conservatively.
Oh, it would have a huge impact on reserve sales.
and just to be clear, we're still following that resolution back in 2011, right? For the investment on the CROA end? Is that the same process that's still to date?
We have been, yes, following.
Just so the community
yes.
can review how the reserves are invested.
Yes, we have not
It's a
updated
mix,
that.
isn't it, Kevin?
Yeah.
It's a hodgepodge, but it's all low risk.
But
Right.
that way, for clarification.
Just give me 1 second, I'm looking for the sheet in Excel.
And Brian and Vaughn and I meet anytime a CD comes due. our treasury analyst at CCMC in Scottsdale, they sit down, they send us an email, which I forward to Brian and Vaughn and Steve, and we all sit down and we talk about what we want to do. And I send out a confirmation to them, they send something back to me, I send that to Kathy Cook as our treasury analyst, so.
And if I remember correctly, last time, we all vote on what do we want to reinvest it to, or if we want to continue it or not. We
No.
just, it's
It's the
just,
treasurer's
everything
job.
stays the same thing.
Right, right. With the lowest risk,
Right.
we have low-risk
Right.
investments,
And that's the one
CDs and
that's-
stuff like that. Everything's fully insured and the highest interest rate we can get.
Okay.
I'd have to redo my thing here, I don't have it easily, but if we made a decision, my argument would be, it's a fair question, it's an argument for, and I will get an answer, but I just can't do it right now. I can get an answer that if that was .015 or .019, meaning 1.5% and 1.9%, how much variability is there over time? If you bounce down to the bottom, Steve, you know, it's 790,000. I mean, if .015 moved it, and I'm making this up, to 750, that $40,000 is probably better than guessing interest rates over 30 years and whether they're going up and down, thought about from a reserve balance. And probably what we as a board should do is when we talked about that 846 up there or 864 up there, we should actually write something that says, you know, this is why we've chosen to have this level of reserve and the variables that we consider. It would probably be good for our thought process and would be good for the thought process of a future board when they come to this and say, oh, these are things these guys thought about and we have to too.
And you can update that policy from 2011 and memorialize that
That's
thought.
probably a good idea.
So two thoughts when thinking about memorializing, and having listened to your explanation, Brian, over the last, whatever it is, 20 or 30 minutes.
2 hours.
Whatever. If it was 2 hours, it was a worthwhile 2 hours. I think what you've said is very powerful. I appreciate all of your experience that you bring. There's no but, by the way.
There's a however.
No, there's not a however. No. And I hope the treasurer will agree. But is there a way that we can capture that, you know, save this on video in some way, write up this as a best practice? Sure, another board could say, we're going to cut the reserves to half of what it is, but there's implications for that.
Well, that's what you're saying through the resolution.
I just think it's-
Have an action, have a 2019 action.
Is-
I would be happy to do the write-up, probably the best person to do it, and have us at the board review it and have that be something that future boards at least have to review.
It's
Because
part
these
of-
are the business questions you need to answer.
It's part of
I
a
think
board-
we've hit the big picture questions.
It's very helpful, very thoughtful, and I just hope that as we have new boards and the learning curve of new boards, this is important stuff for the betterment of the community as a whole.
Okay, I'll take that on. My
Yeah,
responsibility.
the other little piece, and this goes back to, I think, something Jackson said, is, you know, we have for every action item in the regular board book, and we have it for the workshop today, where we talk about half a dozen different things. One is budgeted amount. We may want to add things like, are there any long-term implications for the reserve and for operating expenses? Just ask that, so we memorialize that into what we're saying, and it goes back to Laurel's point about what we share with the community. Here are the implications. It's going to cost $20 a month or $2,000, $2,000 a year. Just the way, or a lot of it will be NA, but just make us think about that, at least discuss that. Looks like an environmental impact statement type thing.
Do you have any comment?
When we look at that 800, that's our reserves, that's repairs, things like that. Going worst case scenario, if we have a horrible hurricane, rips the roofs off everywhere, does our deductible
100,000.
come out of that reserve?
We have
Our deductible would come out.
Yeah.
you have 500,000
Come out
that
of
you
that.
set aside in a whole
Contingency.
separate
We've got a
contingency.
contingency.
Of 100.
500,000 in
500,
that.
okay, that's
Separate.
completely separate.
Right, so we've got a contingency for, that's a correct statement.
Just
yes.
sitting there.
Okay.
And we've got a 100,000 deductible. If I remember
And when we
right.
have to replace it, where does that come from?
Capital.
It's gonna come, when we have to
Capital
replace
special.
it, it's gonna come from
Assessment.
future assessments of some form or
Okay.
another. I mean.
So it just,
When you have to replace what?
If we have to
Contingency.
use the
Oh, the
500,000,
contingency,
how do we
yeah,
come back?
You gotta
How do
read
We have to-
the
we have to read-
future assessments. I mean, there's.
It's
You
not
can
a
either do
rolling
that, or
fund.
you can take it out of your capital dollars, because those capital dollars are not, they're not by charter tied to exactly capital.
So
That's just best practice that
I
we
guess
do.
my last question about this is, are you comfortable as with the $813,000 number, or should the board be looking to increase the reserve fund initial amount to $900,000 or $950,000 in light of all the things we've got going on? I think that's really, for me, the big question is, I get the numbers, I get the structure. Is this the right starting number for us to use, given what we're doing and where we're going?
I sold for the 813 this weekend, and my recommendation would be the 813.
Okay.
I think the engineer can and should be relied upon. Certainly, there's others who have worked with her. I think she's technically competent. I'm happy with the 846. Yes, we've got the contingency 500. I think the reality of the matter is we got many difficult decisions ahead of us. We got a meeting this afternoon at the county. Steve got an update this morning from Don Fisher, so I'm less confident in our county money. That's going to shock all of you.
Surprise, surprise.
And, so I think it's very important that we have a reserve, because we're gonna have people pulling at, anything that's in another pot, someone's gonna be pulling at us, and we all know how the politics of that work. So people have not we, in the charter, Gary and everything's going through, we had talked about protecting this. If that's protected, then the only thing somebody can do is withdraw contributions to it in the future, and at least we as residents can scream as part of the budget process. So I'd be happy with the 813, I'd be happy with this. I think we've done our job well and fair, and I think Kevin suggested to update the old rule is a great one.
Well, my head's nodding yes, if you're looking for head nods.
I mean, this is, the whole board's got feedback, agree, disagree. Obviously, it's part of the budget process, but we're giving Steve direction.
Well, I think it's important too, just to recognize that if we had talked about raising it higher than that. The implication of that is then that means we don't have the money for our annual, that means the amount of money that we can actually spend to do things throughout the year is now lower. So we just removed $95,000 from spending. So I'm comfortable with the 813 that Brian had suggested.
I'm actually building the budget this year by increasing the assessments by 2% first, and then looking at the expenditures going that, and then you're probably gonna have a budget that isn't balanced when we first meet to talk about what we're gonna do, whether we're gonna increase assessments or cut expenses somewhere. Or are you gonna fund it through capital dollars?
And so if we agree, 2% is something we've talked about, the 813 is something Steve would have. I alluded to the county thing that Steve got a notice on this morning. They're voting this afternoon, but Steve got a notice that the perpetuity is still in there.
Well, just to update, I was told 99 years would work, and then when I received the updated agreement, 99 years for everything but the trail. The trail still says in perpetuity. So my question was, why is the trail still in perpetuity when we said 99 years?
So I don't want us as a board to react to something until we actually get it in paper, but, I think we all thought, and we're still back in.
I
Well,
was
it
still
looks like
thinking that
it's-
they weren't gonna change it from in perpetuity,
No,
so.
and I had some text messages with Don Fisher this morning. It looks like the perpetuity for the trail is staying, and the 99 years for the open space and pavilion and meeting rooms will be in there. And it most likely will pass through consent agenda today and then be back in your court after that.
Okay, so, and as a reminder, at the other day's board meeting, I said we were gonna wait for the county thing, and then we were probably gonna vote at the end of this month at our board meeting, and we would put this out into the community and let the community give us feedback for 3 months, or 3 weeks, sorry, and we'll be where we'll be. But should we not take that money, we got tight budget stuff everywhere, so life will be fun. Okay, reserve study. Any last comments, or is everybody nodding their head for Steve to proceed with the
Very
budget?
helpful.
This makes sense.
Thank you for all of the breakdowns, the treasurer and assistant treasurer.
That treasurer's a hell of a guy.
I noted a bit of sarcasm.
Not at all.
Maybe just the sound waves from this end of the room. I don't know.
All right, Weathermatic. Can we go back to Weathermatic now? And
I got one question on Weathermatic.
Quietly.
Yes.
I'm looking at that 10-year cost benefit, or maybe I should go back to one of the prior ones. How much are we gonna save, you think, per year? It's in here, I'm having trouble understanding what the cost savings in the water, how it may offset the cost of the weathermatic system itself. Is that in here?
I think it says up at the top of that page, and I'm trying to get
Is
to
that
that
page
page,
12? Page 11 and 12.
Page 11 and 12?
the cost savings, it's at 25%. They started at 40%. We just thought that was ridiculous.
I did, yeah.
That's,
It's because of the change in the, it's because of the lack of use of water, correct? Is that what it is?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, your savings is water cost savings.
However, it's not holding into the reason why we're going into weathermatic, which is the CDD, the way they bill is by a guesstimate. It's based on this sprinkler head
Maybe
running.
25%.
It's not counting when a sprinkler head is broken and the water goes high. That water bill is going to go up. It's going to be accurate, but if I had to guess, it's going to go up. So to really base it just on savings of water expenses is not the best way to go.
Well, that's why we asked him to reduce it from his 40, which they base all across the country, because we knew that some of the rates would go up in certain parks,
Yeah.
just based on things that have changed over the years, and the CDD hadn't adjusted their flow rates.
And I also think they had like a 7 or 8% originally water increase on a year-over-year basis, and we had them lower that as well, because we want to make sure that it's as conservative as possible.
So just to be clear and make sure that I am understanding now, is the purpose behind it is, first of all, we need to update our systems.
Correct.
The bottom line is, we have to do something.
Right.
And weathermatic is a system that you're comfortable with?
I am.
You've done it in the past, it has the warranty, the pricing is reasonable. Based upon those things, I'm comfortable with your recommendation, just to start it off.
I stick back to where I was a couple months ago, which is try it out in a smaller area, fit the account that we have available for it. We just went through the reserves, and to drop that much more out of the account is difficult. And replacing a system that we just installed in the brand-new athletic fields, for this, we're ripping out something that has been used for a month.
Was that the intent?
It would get a new controller, so I think
The
the
whole
cost
the whole
is
my
system, the
concerns.
whole system wouldn't be.
No, just the
Okay.
controller. It's already got a flow meter, so we would just change out the control unit itself.
That's the
So
most expensive
$1,200
part of
bucks,
a-
something like
Yeah.
that.
About how much would just that system, just that one port be?
About $1,200.
So, okay, 12, okay.
David, Jackson, Bob?
I'm good.
so on their chart where they show water savings, just to clarify, is there really water savings, or is that not real?
We don't know.
It's
It's a
something that they,
guess.
based on their experience, they come up with, and
What do you think?
obviously that's how they sell their systems.
What do
is-
you think?
I'm comfortable with the numbers that they finally came up with. Initially, I said, no way, because I'm not going to sit in front of you in a year from now saying, oh, whoa, we were way wrong. Because you know my personality, I would not be sitting here. So, no, I'm comfortable with their numbers. It all comes down to programming the systems properly, which weathermatic will do. You have, because it's weathermatic, you have weather stations at each control location rather than the 3 that are around the property now. So we all know it can
Right.
rain at Emerson and not rain at North Village. So that will help
Or
out
across
water
the
savings
street.
as well.
And the other thing is, the 25% saving, it's based on if you have accurate records of your prior costs, but our prior costs come from CDD, and those are arbitrary. They just pick a percent that we pay, and we don't really know how much water we're using, is that right?
We
You just get a.
We know how much they tell us we're using based on how the system is set up currently. Each zone is given a gallon per minute rate of usage. So, and that's based on the number of irrigation heads and how much water they flow. 20 some odd years ago is when they calculated it. So, and then they base their run times. So the MaxiCom will say, okay, you ran 38 minutes this week or this month or whatever. that's how the CDD or ECDD bases the cost of water for us.
Plus, there's a community-wide savings or discount, I believe, through the plan that they have with the.
Yeah, both.
And that's applied to that spreadsheet also.
Yeah, if I vote for this, it's not on the basis of the water savings. I think David's point is there's probably a certain amount of puffery that goes in there.
Sure.
You've tried to
Yeah.
narrow it down.
Right.
I think we've got an old system that doesn't work. It needs to be updated. Whether or not we need to update the athletic fields that we just put in, I'll leave to others. But it seems to me that it makes sense to make this step. We've got the money to do it. We've talked about it. We don't have an alternative that we like better than this. I don't think we should make our decision, though, on whether or not there's
Water
cost
savings.
water savings.
So I have a separate question. Just help me understand. In the action item description, it says currently 85% of the irrigation at the parks is controlled by the CDD. So what does that translate to in all of Celebration? Does that mean, how many of these controllers throughout the community are ours? I know they're all theirs, but are running for our watering purposes, and how many are theirs?
And while you
In terms of the equipment, we're replacing what % of the overall community's controllers or equipment?
And when you answer that, also expand it to how are we coordinating with CCDD to make sure that we get
Yeah.
properly billed?
Yeah,
Right. Well, any new areas since about 2014, such as Spring Lake, they're not controlled by the CDD. They have their own water meters and their own controllers. There's 3, I believe, at Spring Lake that run the parks. This building, and the athletic complex are on their own systems. So all the little parks throughout the community, anywhere you see a big silver pedestal, that is where MaxiCom is running through the CDD on our parks. So about 85% of our areas are controlled by the CDD right
Then
now.
this is something else, we're gonna have to expand Ireland Village. That's gonna be another cost.
Just for clarification, when we say the CDD, we're actually referring to the ECDD.
ECDD.
Right.
Yeah. Or no.
Two, when I say CDD, I mean Russ and,
Well, he
and
also
for
works
Mark-
for ECDD as well,
Right,
so.
so
He should be representing
He
ECDD when
does
he's
both.
speaking about water.
correct,
We need to get him
yes.
a green hat and a red hat or something, so we know
Yeah, he
what's what.
has to swap hats because the MaxiCom is overseen by the CCDD because it's their parks as well that are all intertwined. When it comes to the amount we're billed, that would be the ECDD.
Billing comes from ECDD.
Correct.
But the equipment is owned by who? Who's that silver pedestal owned by? That we're
That's-
proposing to
We don't have
replace?
the pink
This is what I'm trying to
slips
figure out.
That
Or we
is
just
up in
replace
the
something with
air.
something.
They originally were installed, obviously, by the developer. The assumption was because it links to the CDD's system, that it was a CDD's equipment. However, like I said, if we have more usage of that controller, it falls back on us.
Why don't we go ahead and we'll push back to them a little bit more and find out if they can give us a more clear definition of who owns what.
Yeah, it might be
Would
good.
CDD be willing to pay some part of this expense for Weathermatic? Have we asked?
Sorry.
so back,
I know, call me
so back, just backing up on that, if the entire
No, you're
I
right.
couldn't say it.
That's pretty funny, Jackson.
if all of the controls, the whole community system was replaced, so it's 100% Weathermatic. I'm leaving the ballparks aside for a minute. Is that something CDD is considering? Will the systems
I
work together?
can't answer for that, for them.
Will the systems work together?
They will work together, yes, so.
Couple things. Hold on. We don't know who owns it. The device that we're putting in, we don't even know who owns it, which CDD there is. I'm looking at the budget from ECDD, and I know that Stephen is at those meetings, so he might have some insight on this. They're waste, I know. But their budget actually calls for things like, I don't know, maintenance and repair of their systems. Maybe we should reach out to them and say, hey, if you're looking to do this, we're having concern with your billing from 20 years ago because your system is outdated.
That's been approached by us several times throughout the years. Their answer to that was for us to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in water meters at each of the parks, which meant tearing up the curb, tearing up the sidewalks, tearing up the parks,
Their
just so
answer,
they could balance out.
Who's they?
The CDD and the
CCD.
ECDD, yes. We had that talk, what, 2015?
Well, when I started in 2014, the rumor was that there was a warehouse somewhere filled with meters that they're just waiting for them to install. And I pushed and pushed, and they said there are no meters anywhere. And if you would like meters to specifically just meter the CROA amenities, then you're going to have to pay for that, not only the purchase of those meters, but the install of those
I
meters.
think this confusion proves the point that we need our own equipment. We simply take the wires out of the pedestals that are there now and plant a new one right next to it on our property, or CROA property, and we're off and running.
Right, but we're gonna have to ask somebody to remove wires from somebody's system, so it's
There-
a full picture right here.
Okay.
No, because we
So let's find out
operate
who owns
in
it.
both of those already, so.
Can we agree that we have interest in Weathermatic and we'd like
Yes.
Todd to come back to us after working with CCD or ECD and actually lay out for us in a page or two memo, this is how it would be executed. So
Okay.
that's what
Yes.
we're talking about, the execution strategy.
Yeah.
Questions are perfectly fair. So, and we want to make damn sure after we spend the money, somebody else doesn't say, well, we own it because it's
Yeah.
on our property. So how do we implement is the question. Is that a fair thing for the
Yes,
board?
and avoiding unexpected surprises.
Yes. That
We're
can
expecting
certainly be
surprises.
done.
And it gets very
No, I think
confusing
that's
with,
great.
But-
when we
but-
just say
That's a very good
CDD,
But you're talking
there's
about
two.
approval in concept.
Okay, so I'll make the motion. The motion is we approve Weathermatic in concept. The questions that we are asking management now to clarify is how it would be implemented to make sure that we get the assets such that it's clear we own them and we know that we have a fair billing process, because we don't want to be stuck in this. I'm rambling here, Rachel, but we don't want to be stuck in a situation where CCD could just simply say, well, it doesn't matter what you did, this is how we're going to bill you anyway.
Thank you for the
So, is that
investment.
fair?
Thank you for the investment.
That's a two-page.
Rachel, listen on tape. Wow. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
Is it clear what we're trying to do?
Appreciate that direction,
Thank you,
absolutely.
Todd.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the interest of time, let's go to Lakeside Gate Security, and we got 45 minutes, I want to rock and roll on somebody, so is that you, Todd?
That's me, I'll still sit here. So, we talked about bollards, a lighter weight bollard, for our entrance to replace, bollards that we already have there that would be, easier used by our park monitors and maintenance staff. And I did go back to a couple of companies, and found some bollards, if you can see that, Jackson.
Yeah.
So I got an initial price, I'm still waiting on some others since, I only had a couple of days to get this. But they were at, let's see, about $295 a piece, and we're looking at 5 of them.
So 1,500 roughly.
Yeah, about 1,500.
Where's the mounts for those again? On our side, this side of the bridge, or?
Right where the pavement
Lakeside.
changes color,
You guys-
so it's on
It
this,
becomes our property.
it's the
It's on
lakeside
our
side of the
property.
bridge, it's on our property, there's holes in the asphalt
Do
already.
those fit, or they need their own mounting system?
No, these will fit into the holes that are already
Do they
there.
lock in place?
These will not lock in place, so you have to look at where we put them during the daytime, which my suggestion would be to put them in holes somewhere right around that area. My only concern is they're gonna be light, so how many are gonna end up in the pond?
I think if we're going to buy them, we have to buy something that locks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or they're going to
Yes.
end up.
Yeah.
In trunks.
Yes, well, the current ones that are heavy do lock in place. They have a mechanism where you turn the top, and it's the same wrench that you use on fire hydrants, so the fire department can unlock them. So they were well thought out, but they're very heavy.
I didn't see any images in the board packet. You just
There
referenced
wouldn't
an
be.
image,
This
I was
was
just
a-
curious.
This was new direction from last Wednesday.
Yeah, it was a Wednesday night thing, but the bollards are basically to mimic what the light poles look like with the fluted base and a cannonball top to it.
Are they the type that's currently, if you look over at the fountain, Wald's Fountain, it's right over by the sidewalk entrance right there. There's 2 facing Kilwins.
I don't recall.
Okay.
Can we
They're
as a
just
bo-
for consistency with the things.
Can we as a board agree to give Todd more time so that we get something that actually locks in? I mean,
Yeah.
let's not spend 1,500 and make it the back porch fodder for a year about why did they waste money with something that doesn't lock.
And I did get an update on the gate. If it was to be moved to the side location, it dropped it down to $4,978 as compared to what, 61
Which we wouldn't
something?
need if we have the bollards.
When you
We
talked
talked about
doing
doing both.
Doing both.
both.
We need both.
Just one.
Need a gate and bollards?
I don't know why you'd need the gate if you have the bollards.
I don't either.
Yeah.
Let's price out the bollards.
Well,
I think I would start with the bollards, and then we could always add a gate if there was an issue that arose, but let's spend money, because the bollards are gonna cost more based on what we just heard, but let's spend money for a good product that we can be proud of.
Something that locks in.
Roll out.
Okay.
And some TCC will approve.
Well, they would
But
approve the
they're
bollards,
existing.
because they're already,
Well, we already
yeah.
have bollards, but if it has a certain design to it, probably.
Which is why I'm referencing those.
Which would look
It
like the
be
lights that you're
consistent.
talking about, right?
Yeah.
Do more homework, and let's say we'll discuss this at our August board meeting, if you've had a chance then, by the end of this month, to come up with something that works.
Okay.
We've got the 3 months, we approved the 3 months, right? So
Yeah.
we've got that there, so this will just be the charge for the end of the month. Is that fair to everybody?
Yep.
Speaking of the August board meeting and backtracking just real quickly to the weathermatic, Todd, is between now and the August 28th board meeting enough time for you to get the additional information the board's asking for weathermatic? Because my purpose of this question is, does the board want this to be an action item at the end of August, or do you want to have one more workshop to discuss it before you bring it to an action?
Personally, I'm fine with, without doing another workshop on it, as long, because we've already discussed it, we know the details, we know what we want, we know what the goal is. That's my personal
Yeah.
opinion. I
It's a
don't know.
logistics and implementation question.
Right.
I think we make an action item at the board meeting. August would be great, September will also suffice if it has to, but we come back with, let's float something to the board in advance so that we can ask a lot of questions before the meeting, so that we actually go to a meeting with a 2-page, whatever, that the board conceptually is, and then we can discuss it, but we're not workshopping it, we've actually agreed.
Is it,
Can we put the bollards on there as an action item as well?
Bollards should be an action item at the
It
end.
should be, our deadline to Susan is this Friday for all of our information, but, so, if Susan gives me a couple more days to next week, yes, we can.
well, if-
Susan.
I always do when they ask.
Okay.
Well, I think to carry that on with that, for some reason, if you don't have the information you need for us, putting it on September would be okay too. I don't know, I mean, that's
I would
my
rather do it
person.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Dave, Parks and Facilities Master Plan, anything there?
Nothing new other than what we heard at the board meeting is I think we've gotten the revised report back.
Yep.
And I haven't seen the revised report.
Yeah, there were a few touch-up items from that revised report, just to kind of maneuver things where they belong. And I had a phone call conversation with them on Friday. They are looking about 2 weeks to get everything touched up, updated, and then we'll schedule a presentation to the CROA board at a workshop, public workshop.
So we're thinking of okay, that would be the public presentation at a workshop?
Correct. Well, you'll get it before the public presentation so that the board can read through it again, but the workshop will be, I won't have a date for that until about 2 weeks. They're just finalizing
So
everything, and then
What are we guessing, September?
it'll probably be in September.
Okay. That
September
has
workshop.
implications for the board, for the,
Yeah, for the article, you're right.
I would think early September, which means, so it's not public until he presents it.
I want to make sure that you all see the final version of it. Anything after this, though, will end up costing us money if we want to modify it, but I'll get this final version to you. It's going to take them about 2 weeks. They have a travel week where they're doing another master plan for another community, so they have to eliminate that week, so it'll be about 2 weeks to get everything together.
So we should probably get it on the schedule, whether it's a regular workshop or a special workshop.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about timing here.
Well, the 16th is the
16th is
September
the
workshop,
day
and that's a budget workshop.
Workshop on the budget. However we workshop this or do something publicly, maybe we take it.
do we just add a different date once we have more? Can we just add a different date just strictly for the,
On a quick update item, we had talked about whether or not we want to do a public meeting in September. So let me ask the question slightly different. If we went with the last half of September and said we were going to do a public meeting, and at that point in time, we also brief them on the Parks and Recs thing, because then you'll have a good audience. We have to understand that as soon as we do this parks plan, people are going to want to know what happened with the county money, and kill us one way or the other, and then how much funds do we have to do whatever. So it's going to be a politically interesting process.
But this would be him coming in to present, correct?
Correct, yes, but you'll have the final report prior to them doing the
Well,
presentation.
the question is, once we look at the report, do we really need them coming in to present? Is there value in them coming in to present, or do we really have a report and say, here's where the heck we're
It's
at?
part of what we've already paid for, correct?
It is, yes.
Unless we
But-
shift the cost to
Then we
something
have-
else.
It costs a little maybe. I mean,
Can
maybe
we
we
sh-
also, I didn't think they presented worth a darn last time. I actually thought I would rather have you present, David, or
Well, but
somebody.
the other thing is it puts on them the process they went through and how they looked at the data.
Right.
Yeah,
So
but
rather than being
if-
our
if-
process.
If they present the way they did previously, the net is a loss to us. I mean, you're a much better explainer-in-chief of stuff like that, and I'm just not anxious to get hoisted on their petard over this.
Can we shift the cost of the presentation and for something, for a different type of a service? I mean, is there anything else that we've been talking about that we want them to update after we get it? You know what I mean? Rather than having to pay for them to come and do the presentation,
One of the
can we?
things David had talked about is David wanted a lot better understanding of the data and access to the data and stuff like that. I personally would feel much more comfortable with you presenting, and if the cost shift was that they were gonna take a half a day to actually work with you and a couple other board members, if they wanna be part of it, I don't care, and really educate on the process and pass the data and do a better job, I'd be much happier with that, because I trust you.
In terms of, well, some of the things I want is some more sub-analyses. You know, if you look at some of the data, and I mean, some of the questions were just about artisans, so, I mean, here's how the community feels, here's artisan residents versus non-resident. There's none of that. I think that deeper understanding is helpful.
So going back to the other thing, if we chose to have a community meeting in the last half of September, gives us plenty of time, it's right after the budget meeting, we could do a thing there, we could take part of the meeting, half hour, whatever, and have David present and really talk about, this is the feedback from the Parks and Rec plan. We still have time for Q&A, if we do it 20 hours, something like that. I'm just brainstorming out loud, but it would be effective, and it would probably have 80 to 100 people like we've had before, and it would get heard.
Any concerns with doing that, Steve? I mean, since you've been working with the vendor, can
I
you
don't
think that?
have a concern at all
Okay.
with us presenting it in-house. My concern is if we think we're going to shift those dollars of them coming in, they're probably gonna say a lot of those dollars are already eaten up in additional rewrites and survey question rewrite, things like that. And I think any sub-analysis that we wanna do, they're gonna give us the data and we'll just have to dig through it ourselves. It's not part of
For
our
that is
initial
in a
report.
user-friendly way, that's okay. I mean, if it's Excel or.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we
think
have a
also-
board meeting for the 25th of September. Where would we put this event?
Well, if we're going to do a public meeting, we're probably gonna need a separate day.
Separate date than the board meeting.
Right,
Yeah.
so I'm just
We
asking.
could do it the week before,
Well, what
or
if-
even earlier
what if
that
we-
week.
What if we did something like October 1st or 2nd? I mean, we got the board meeting on the 25th, and we got a workshop on the 7th. I mean, if people are around.
Can't do it the 26th because that's at Welcome to
Well, no, I'm
the
thinking the week,
neighborhood.
I'm thinking the week after. What if we
October
tried to
2nd.
do something like October 1 or 2?
Yeah.
We need every board member, obviously.
Yeah.
I won't be here.
You won't be here.
Will you be here at all the first week of October or
No.
not? Okay. Well, we have our October 7th is a workshop.
So we're gonna have the report in about 2 weeks,
Correct.
which is about the 20th.
You hope.
Well, or give it another week. We'll have it by Labor Day, September 1st.
Can we wait and find out what, and then schedule the
That's
meeting?
probably the best bet. Let's get the final report back and then do our scheduling from there.
And then see what our questions might be.
We have a board meeting on the 28th, so why don't we agree, it shouldn't be a long action item, but on the board meeting on the 28th, we'll agree on the date to do the September public 2-hour presentation incorporating this into it. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it'd probably be around October,
Yeah,
First week or second week of October?
yeah.
early October,
Early
first or
October.
second week, maybe.
Which would fit in well also with where we're at with the budget process and things to talk about on a lot of things, plus the athletic fields will be live and everything, so it'd be a good briefing type thing.
Yeah, we're what do you call, a ribbon cutting, probably in September also?
We're working with the different groups to try and get a September 14th ribbon cutting
Okay.
for the athletic field companies.
Okay.
Okay, surveillance cameras.
Todd,
And Patrick.
welcome.
Let's got back up.
Todd showed today.
Well, I'll start off with, we're right on target with our extended schedule that you so graciously had provided us. Patrick and I have been working closely together on these cameras, or the camera system. We have 3 contractors that we're looking at. It's more in-depth than I think what we ever thought it would be, because you have electrical engineers, you have analytic engineers. There's a lot of engineers involved in this. So I have been working with Stanley Security. We also use Stanley for our alarm monitoring and security systems. So that's one reason I went with them, and they are one of the industry leaders. And they have another engineer coming out this Wednesday. So I'm hopeful. I told them the deadline was this Friday for me to get their information. I'll let Patrick finish on his.
Okay, and I've met with Signature Systems of Florida, and they work with Milestone, which is also that VMS software that we're looking at, the video management software that we're looking at. The 3, I guess, leaders in the industry are Genetec, Milestone, as well as Avigilon, which is that Microsoft company, Motorola, my apologies. And so I did receive 2 bids so far, just awaiting the 3rd one that should come in sometime this week, in time for us to put something together and present that to you later on this month. But like Todd mentioned, there are a lot of moving parts. We do have a few more people coming on site just to take a look at the electrical requirements in some of the areas, so that we can expand on some of the cameras, camera locations, which are a bit difficult. Lakeside, extending that basketball courts and tennis courts. North Village has a street in between all the different playgrounds and the pool. So there are some challenges there that they have all the information that they need. They're just looking at putting that all together to present something to us so that we can move forward. So we're just still in the information gathering process, but we should have a nice side-by-side comparison shortly.
Did y'all receive the site plans showing camera locations and such? So you see how it's...
2 weeks ago.
That was-
in my
Yeah, a few weeks ago.
It was married with a bunch of other stuff
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I was
yeah.
updating.
It had the
that
red,
was-
red dots, green dots,
Right,
and all that,
right,
yeah.
Yeah, it showed existing and proposed new ones. So you have, like Patrick said, take for instance North Village Playground, trying to get a wireless signal to the other side of the playground from the pool building is a challenge.
Because there's no place to put a booster either, is there?
They're looking at, what did you call it, geo-fencing or something like that?
Like a mesh network, and that's just a series of hardware to make them all communicate. We tried a few line of sight options, but with Celebration being as mature as it is, the landscaping is a challenge. You're trying to push a signal through a number of trees and bushes and shrubs, so they're still working on that. That is not my expertise, so what they come to me with, I'll definitely understand what they're doing, but I can't provide a solution for that, so I'm curious to see what they come to the table with.
I am going to make one suggestion, because I think the information that we're all going to receive on the cameras and the cost associated with it, we're looking at more of a per location pricing, because I think it's going to be substantial in my opinion. I really think, not to break our timeframes, that this may be better talked about at a workshop rather than trying to push it through a regular board meeting, because I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions just like we do. Not trying to extend our time, so if you want to set it workshop before our next board meeting, we're fine with that, or put it at the regular workshop.
We gave you until the 31st to produce the document, so
We
I
did.
wasn't thinking it was at 28th. And I was thinking that we were then going to turn around and have to
workshop.
I think there's gonna be a ton of questions.
Yes.
So I wasn't expecting to
And it's
approve
not gonna
this.
be cheap, which
No.
means it's gonna be even more questions.
And we're running out of space for operating items in our budget, so it's most likely going to be a capital expenditure.
As my
Unless
only
it's broken into
comment,
years.
in advance, if you will, would be, as it comes to us, maybe think of your priority of if we can only do 1, 2, or 3 locations, where would your goals be? And that's just something to think about for the
Yeah,
future
absolutely,
conversation.
absolutely.
If we have to split it
I
up.
think one of the priorities would be replacing existing, so, which would be the lesser of the two expenses. New, and then we can narrow it down to areas we think would be best served.
So you're looking at, when you do the costing, it's per setting? Is that what you said?
It is, well, the one initial cost is the video management system, VMS. Those are pretty big numbers, and they've ranged all over the board from 29,000 initial cost to, just under 100,000, which,
But that would be your master control.
that's the master control.
Which is very important, because that's what's going to
Right.
take in any feed, any
Right.
camera feed.
From
and
anywhere.
And.
Whether it's
and-
dog
and
park,
really-
athletic fields.
Exactly.
So when
and-
but if you talk about per setting, you may say, okay, in North Village, we've got an existing infrastructure, to upgrade that is X amount. And so we could also make some decisions per setting and do it over time?
Yes, that's the
Rather than
goal.
all at
Yeah,
once?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the CCFC complex is gonna have to be something that we look at, as a separate item, because it's new.
Yes, you are correct. That,
And
we
a
have
high
specifically
value
asked for that
asset.
area to be separated out.
I'm good with Lee.
Wouldn't
Thank you.
surprise me if we take an entire workshop
Thank you.
on this one.
Yeah.
And then the question, as you're getting ready for the preparation, or for your, whatever you're gonna present, and ties into what we talked about earlier, the ongoing costs. So what are the ongoing costs? And then would there be software upgrades? Yeah, just, what are the implications over time after we make the initial investment?
That'll be in our report. Patrick's been
Okay.
dealing more with the technical side of it, but we can tell you that one system is about half the cost throughout the coming years on their software updates and such. So Patrick is getting
Okay,
down to the
okay.
nitty-gritty on the software side of it.
Thank
Good.
you.
Well,
Brian, I'm going to ask if, since we're done with this particular agenda item, we actually finished a lot quicker than I was expecting based upon these big topics. And we were unable to get the task force update at our last board shop meeting because we canceled it. Can we squeeze in the quick update, the task force in with the Blue Sage and the UCF sustainability?
Let's go to the technology committee.
Any of the,
We have 4 things.
so can we just add those in really quick too, please?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, let's be really quick. Blue Sage, anything to talk about?
Yes.
She's smiling, must be good.
Yes, I'm really
You're
excited.
always smiling.
So, our challenge was that they didn't have the reserves to cover the bids that we were receiving to replace the roof, in addition to the roofing engineer that would be overseeing the project. So I was out meeting one company, trying to get another round of bids, a 3rd round, I think. And I was talking to a roofer, and he had some different ideas, and I thought, well, what if we did the townhome buildings and save the garages for next year, or at a later time at least? Because this is where the leaks are occurring, this is where people get their property damage inside that they're still dealing with, and then the garages, basically house, supplies, cars, whatever people tend to put in there. And plus, we'd be using the same color, so it's not a drastic change. Of course, we would get ARC approval for this. So I went to Stratus Roofing, who's the company that's doing the repairs right now, which, by the way, the homeowners have given positive feedback on that. And their bid for just the townhomes was significantly lower.
What was the bid?
And looking, pardon me?
How much was the bid?
108.
108?
Yes, including the gutters. And looking at the financials this weekend, it falls within what they have available. Plus, the engineer that I got a bid from was $21,000, which takes it to $129,000. They have $153,000, I think, now. So that extra $20,000 buffer gives the room for, in case the engineer goes higher, which we know always happens, any kind of wood repair, anything outside that. So I think it's a wonderful solution, and I'm really excited to present it to the homeowners if you are in agreement.
Thank you.
No garages.
Oh.
That's huge. I
I mean,
think it's,
eventually the garages are gonna have to be
Yes.
replaced also.
Next
It's
year,
temporary
whatever.
I
pieces,
think,
but.
yeah, we can
But
work
it's,
on it
but it's a
next year.
funding delay, which was.
Which
Right.
we
It's
needed,
needed.
yeah.
I think it's a very fair and caring reaction to a situation, and I think it's out of the box. It's not your typical celebration. You know, most owners of a single-family home, if they had a similar situation and said, hey, I'm gonna replace the garage next year in my house now because it's the issue, we'd have to look at that, and it's essentially a hardship in a weird way.
Yeah,
So I think it's a great path, so thank
Just
you.
to remind the board, we were looking at a shortfall of as much as $55,000 in this complex.
It's not
and
gonna be good.
That is a spectacular.
In the interest of time, everybody agree,
All for it.
proceed with God?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Great job.
Thank you. The problem solver of the day.
UCF Sustainability Study.
On time, on budget, one section to go of interviews with management. I think the goal here has been simply to let UCF do their study without us trying to micromanage it, and then we'll review the results, and I'm excited to be able to share that, as we have scheduled later in the fall, so.
Our final interviews are
You've had
tomorrow.
positive feedback.
It's been a great experience so far. I think that you're gonna be pleased with the outcome, and to have some metrics behind the different tasks and action items that we're doing I think it's gonna be beneficial for us.
I love the autonomy that we've given UCF in doing this too, rather than we don't have our hands in it at all, which is perfect.
And I appreciate the other members of the board who probably would like to be involved, having kept their hands off. I'll just tell you, I have done the same. I have kept my hand, not anyone in particular who likes surveys, but I think at the end of the day, we have a report with integrity that we can evaluate.
Perfect.
Yep, I love
All right, we're gonna do Gary next, and then we'll go to Stephen on the,
Technology.
Good morning.
Hey.
I submitted the first interim report. Hopefully you
We
got
got it.
that. I wrote this with an eye that someone's going to be looking at this 10 years from now. So that's why I included all the background and data, and you're going to see this again over and over because of the 3 interim reports. One of them's going to survive, and they're going to pull it out of the file, and everything will be there. Do you have any questions?
Just a huge
I just
thank
want to
you.
say, I thought the interim report was spectacularly helpful. It was specific, it gave the timelines, it explained what's being done. If anyone's got questions about where we are, I think you could get those questions answered. The work of the task force has been gigantic. It's just huge, and it seems to be a project that grows, not shrinks. And I appreciated you consolidating all of that information in one spot, and I would encourage the community to read these interim reports. They are very, very helpful.
We can post this
I
on
was
the
gonna say,
website.
only the community see this, we
We
gotta
need to
post
post
it
it.
somewhere.
Just
Right.
post it under community notices?
Yeah, but as long as the
Have a link?
board's okay with that, we'll get it posted.
I think it would be good posted.
Yeah, I think so too.
I've been to half the meetings, roughly. I mean, I think they're working well. I think sometimes they're fast and efficient, sometimes they're difficult, but it's a very difficult task. As I read this, I get the feeling that you are comfortable with the proceeding well. You, on page 3 or 4, whatever that page was, has some questions for the board. I think it would be worthwhile, at least to quickly, let's just quickly go through them. And it's on the bottom of page 3 and page 4. The first question was timeline process with the celebration company review the proposed changes. Vaughn is our representative to CJC. I will not be around, but Vaughn, maybe you can talk to Paige a little at the CJC meeting here in a couple weeks.
I'll make sure I'm
Paige,
at the
when
meeting
David
too.
and I had a meeting with him a couple, 3 months ago. And Paige basically wants the board to run with things and support us where he can. I think the right answer here is to have Paige say, go with God, and maybe the right answer would be for a couple members of the board to brief Paige at some point in time so he can grease the wheel. Does the board agree with that statement?
Yes.
Well, I can do it if the board agrees.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be at the CJC meeting, it can be after it or before it, or I'll let you decide how.
I almost feel like we should have, and this is my personal opinion, Gary has done a great job of making sure that our CROA attorney is involved at every step of the way and is totally informed on everything. So I don't feel really uncomfortable with the fact that there's anything in there that's being added or switched around or anything to where legal wouldn't be already in agreement because they've already been consulted. So I would be okay with even having CJC, prior to actually submitting it officially to our attorney, review it if we need to do that too.
David's our other representative too.
We're both-
Were you gonna say something?
Do we have a date for the CJC meeting?
Yes.
I've not seen it.
Yes.
Gary was gonna
16th.
put something in there real quick. Go
Not been
ahead.
noticed.
I encourage the board to liaison with TCC on a verbal basis. We're still early, this is August. I'm reluctant for you to give them any document
No,
that.
I don't want to give them
Well,
a document at all.
right,
All I want to do
because it's
is
gonna
have
change.
David and Vaughn grease the wheels.
Yes.
And what I
Right.
think they'll really care about is sections in the charter that affect TCC explicitly. And I think it'll be our responsibility, and yours too, to be able to say, there's this 11.3 here, and 15.2, these are the ones you need to be aware of. So.
That's fine.
You
Exactly.
two come back to us and say, okay, you've
We'll talk.
talked with Paige and how it's going that
Just
one.
some talking points. Okay.
Request, item number 3, request expenditure of allocated funds for 2 direct mailings to the association members in January and February.
This would be above and beyond what you think you have planned. This is my recommendation. You know you're going to send out the ballots. So there's one mailing that I'm aware of. It's going to be the ballots for the charter as well as the election of the officers. What I'm asking for is 2 additional mailings. One of them is a letter that's going to go out in early January that's going to be, for people who don't read the Celebration News, they're going to get a letter in the mail that they'll have to open, hopefully, and explain what we're doing that we've never done before. Yes, you can say we did vote on the charter 10 years ago. We had an amendment, one little amendment, that was in 2014, I believe, 2015. But this is a big deal. So that's one expense. The other is, I'd like to follow that up with a postcard in February, which will be less expensive.
Board members, thoughts?
I'm all about communication. If the dollars are available, I think it's something worth looking into.
Well, as we're running the budget now, that's something that we can add into the 2020 operating budget.
Do we have a mailing in the fall with respect to budget?
There is a mailing in the fall that.
Is
Is that separate from our
Yeah.
Yeah, we
quarterly
always do,
assessment?
yeah,
So
we
we
do.
could stick an extra page
So
in
what
there,
if
but
we-
we have the third.
What if we did a, here's what's coming? This might negate one of the February ones?
Well, the February one is meant to get the people who forget to vote before the deadline of March the 3rd.
So what I'm saying is
Keeping
fold
that.
it into the,
Keep
fold
that.
it into the fall mailing.
Addition.
We have it as part of the ballot in January, and then a reminder. So I'm just adjusting this.
When is your fall mailing planned
Let's
for?
do all 3 of them. It's not going to be
Okay.
that
I think,
much of an
yeah.
expense. If we don't pass this and we got to wait a year, it's going to be more expensive.
That's my thought. It's going to be about $2,500 if you consider one page plus postage and envelopes.
And then a postcard.
Right, and that'll be a little more, so round about 3,000 or less. But you do the calculations, that's my guess. And I don't want this opportunity to slip up.
Right.
And then we can look back on it and say, yeah, that was worth it. Or,
Is that
yeah.
acceptable? Everybody
Yeah.
agree?
Concept, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Item number 4, provide process for how the board of directors will review approved final draft of the documents.
We've talked about this a couple of different times, and there are a lot of different approaches that we could take. There could be some informal opportunities to discuss at workshops around the interim reports and so on. Our hope was, and Vanessa, correct me if I'm wrong, but our hope was that when the final document comes to us, or the final ballot options come to us, that the board would simply make a yes or no, up or down vote across all of those without further amendment. In other words, you're going to have to vote to send all of this to the community or none of it. And the reason, obviously, is that 7 of us could certainly micromanage that process in depth. I don't think that that would benefit the community much, and I think it would take away from the work that the task force has done. They have been preparing the, and correct me, Gary, if I'm wrong, but I think the task force has been working on the idea that they have to give us something that is complete, accurate, and ultimately palatable to the community, it should be a relatively easy discussion for us to point out some things and then take an up or down vote. That would be my preference.
I would like to have our hands off of it as much as possible, and it truly be the work of the task force.
Well, I appreciate that, and this is just another opinion. The reason I brought this up was, I want us to be transparent and the community to know what's going to happen before it actually happens, and not surprised by a change in procedure. The other reason is, you did appoint a task force to look at this, and you appointed them by name, and then asked the community to participate. And I fully believe that we'll have greater and greater participation as we move through the fall. So you're not only looking at the task force, but dozens, if not more, of individuals who've come out of the community to attend the meetings and voice their opinion. And I don't want to lose that input by the board, pardon me for saying micromanaging something. However, there is opportunity come this fall, before we're done, we're going to look at the entire document from beginning to end. So we're not done yet.
Excuse me. Like I said, I've been to about half the meetings. I think what I care most about the process, because I think the process works well with what we've done with people and stuff like that. Board should be copying on everything so that at least the board is keeping up to speed. But at the end of the day, what I care most about is presenting a product at the end of the day for voting that people can actually get their hands around and make sense. And, you know, we push hard sometimes at Gary about keeping the changes as easy as we can, because at the end of the day, you got a community and they're gonna go, oh, what am I looking at, you know? And making it look as simple and as straightforward as possible is very important.
And believe me, we're not done yet, because we have consultations with the legal team, and ourselves are going to look through the entire document before it's over and try to smooth out some of the rough language. That's why I don't like to leak a rough document, because it won't be what we're going to see at the end. We're still working on those wording.
Thank you. Quick point of question. We were talking about the CJC meeting. I have it listed as August the 13th. Is that
Tuesday the 13th.
It is still the 13th, okay.
Okay. Any other item for Gary?
So, yeah, right on that, when we talk about the board, I agree with the board keeping its hands off. Jackson was saying that the board needs to vote to send it to the community. Is there a place, and should there be a place for a vote by the board to endorse this? Because that's a different piece than voting to send it to the
I
community.
thought there already was that. I thought the board had to actually sign on to sending it out.
But it's sending it to the community could say,
Sending
we're
it
not,
to the
we're
community
not.
is different than saying we endorse it.
So I'm asking about.
I'm hopeful that it will be a no-brainer that we would endorse it,
Okay.
and that we would have that conversation.
Okay.
You know, but
It
I
never
think to be
occurred to me that
explicit.
we would use any other words,
Yeah.
because otherwise.
We're sending it
We're
out.
sending you last balance,
Well,
you know, this
because
ballot.
we're required to send it to you, and you all decide.
Yeah.
I mean,
I like
think
the
we have
explicitness
to.
of it, though.
I think we have to have positive language from the board as a whole.
Absolutely.
because I think community will say, you all have been involved much more, in the task force certainly, but the board, we want to know what you think. Okay.
Okay. Eileen, you have a comment?
Yeah, Eileen Barr, 1138 Mosaic Drive. I just want to say thank you to Gary, because he's just done an extraordinary job. That he and I are in 100% agreement. And it is good that we are going to look over everything, because there is one little teeny tiny thing that we've passed that I'm really not happy with, but it's nothing major. But it's an extraordinary job, and I just want to say thank you.
And thank you, Eileen.
Sometimes Gary wants to kill me too.
I think we've all been on everybody's hit list at one point in time on this one.
All right, any last item for Gary?
Do you have something else, Gary?
Just want to let you know, I've already submitted our first big article for the Celebration News. It'll appear in the September issue. They will get more specific as the months roll by.
Thank you.
Stephen, can I ask you to come up? I
Thank
went
you,
to the
Gary.
technology committee the other day because I've never been, and I was just curious to go to one, see how it works. Card charging stations was one item they needed a direction item on from the board and Steve, so I told Steve I'd try to get him 5 minutes, and I'll let Steve roll with it.
Okay, I apologize, it's known as workshop fatigue, and so I'll go through this very quickly. Duke Energy has a Florida electric vehicle charging pilot program. Duke Energy is looking for electric vehicle charging stations throughout Florida. And the bottom line of this is that Duke Energy of Florida provides the chargers at no cost. The number of chargers is limited. They have a program, what is known as Park and Plug. It's a new pilot program from Duke Energy to bring electric vehicle charging stations to communities like Celebration. And they're seeking for qualified hosts to serve as charging station locations. The chargers, again, are free. Duke needs locations to get started. The program will run through December 2022. Why participate? Well, we've done it in an informal survey, was done with members of the Technology Committee. There is an outcry for electric charging stations within the community, especially in the downtown area, for a lot of people who would like to have electric vehicles that are in apartments or condominiums. The demand is growing rapidly. This is a great opportunity. One of their pilot reasons of why they're doing this is they want to enhance the visibility of Duke's and also get Celebration's organizational sustainability efforts, provide additional benefit to tenants, employees, and customers who drive electric vehicles, and to promote clean transportation and clean energy through the community. Again, one of the things that we were tasked to look at in our resolution. Okay, who can participate? We must be a Duke Energy customer here in Florida. We are. Agree to participate through the program through 2022. The site host agreement, there is one. The issue is that the Technology Committee is not empowered to sign for the association, or actually, this would not only do, we first looked at trying to put charge points on CROA facilities. This looks at it as the possibility that it goes community-wide. So then that means that we're going to have to draw in a lot of the other players, be it CDD, ECCD, TCC, CROA, and all of that. But what we'd like to first do is make the contact officially with Duke and have them come in here and see if they're willing to participate within, here's Celebration. They have some site requirements. It has to be safe, well-lit, paved, adequate ingress and egress, and they know where all the power is because they're Duke Energy. Provide one parking space for charge points, and again, non-discriminatory access to the electric vehicle charging spots. This may pose one issue. We've done a site survey of the community. One of the first places that we were thinking about doing this was Lakeside. The problem with that is it's going to be behind the bollards or the fence.
But the bollards were only, as we discussed yesterday.
Only as we discussed.
At late at night, and they're taken down early in the morning.
So
You can't charge your car overnight.
right.
No parking overnight.
To give you the quick summary here, Duke Energy is willing to do this for free. I think it's a win-win myself, and I'm not a technology expert, but it works, but we need to say, go with God. Steve,
I
you have
just-
some comments here too?
Well, the only concern I have, I think it's a good initiative, and definitely if the direction wants to give me that, or the board wants to give me that direction, we'll move forward with it. But I want to make sure that this doesn't trump the objective that you gave the Technology Committee, which is to develop a 3 to 5 year plan for consideration and implementation. And it seems like we're taking a piece of that plan and saying, let's move forward with it. How does this fit with what you want to see with the whole big picture plan?
Unless it's like a deadline time frame.
This right now, the issue with this is, the only reason why we're taking this is we saw this as a quick win was the first thing. It's free, and we're behind. Because this thing was announced early this year, it's been buried, it wasn't really seen. Actually, in the last July, end of July, Duke Energy, if you get their updates, if you follow the rabbit trail to the bottom of what it had, it actually started to talk about this. So it's out there. They'll do so many. We'd like to see if they could do a couple. And that's the process of this thing. We're still looking at, trying to figure out short, midterm, and long-term items. We're going across the board in technology. Brian sat in and his eyes glazed over as to a lot of the things that we've been discussing and trying to go over. But,
on the other hand, I found the meeting very interesting. I would actually I can't make the September one, but I would encourage board meetings to go. It actually was kind of interesting to listen to.
different dynamic.
As a non-technology type guy, just out here, I'm talking about solar and all this other junk. I pushed Stephen to come here today because if we can get Duke Energy to do something for free and it has value in the long run, I just think it's silly not to listen, but I'll listen to all feedback, but we need to say charge. And then to Steve's question, because Steve and I had spoke this morning, I don't think we're changing, Kevin, correct me, I don't think we're changing the long-term goal of putting together the vision, but this is something that fits in with a time constraint that I think fits.
I'm just wondering what power we have on this. If this has got to go on CROA property or CDD property, I mean, what's going to be our
Phase one is really, we need to fill out an application. With this application, then they start to talk to us. If they come in and we have this discussion with them, please understand, I am more of a pessimist than an optimist in life. I plan for all courses of action. This almost sounds to be too good to be true. But I need them to come in and to discuss, not to just the committee, but to Steve, and then we work our way through this. If it is what they say, then we will then, at that point, with the site survey, because that's what they're going to do, is they're going to look to see the equipment's going to be theirs, it's their electricity, they're selling it, they're doing it. The win part is we're just trying to provide a service to the community. And then from there, we can, now, if the sites that they select are other locations, being CROA, CDD, ECCD, and all that, then those discussions will push forward. And I would dare say, yes, somebody might say no. But then that's just one less place that they'll be placed. And that's all that I'm trying to say.
So it sounds like utilize this form to determine how big of a priority this fits within your overall plan. And if it's a sense of urgency, it needs to be done yesterday, then it moves to a top priority on the plan.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I respect Steve's comment about the resolution. However, when an opportunity presents itself, especially one that sounds really, really intriguing, it's definitely worth looking into.
Yes.
I think that's without a question. There are other areas in the community that are having these chargers.
Yes.
Celebration Company and the shops over by Five Guys, those are in.
Georgetown has one now too.
So it's happening. So to go ahead and avoid that is, it's not the new way of celebrating.
The issue is that we were doing research prior to this coming to light to us. And the research of saying that we were going to then look at CROA facilities only and implementation and doing all that, I just saw your reserve study, we can't afford it. Okay, unless somebody wants to make a great donation. Because the issue of the whole thing is that what would have happened is we'd have to pick the site, we'd have to do the permitting, we'd have to have all of those particular things as to what's going on. Duke Energy is going to come in and do the vertical integration from the site's been picked, they're going to do it, they're going to install, and they're going to do everything themselves. And it's going to be labeled Duke Energy. And the only thing that's going to have the benefit, hopefully, is the community. And
Quite simply.
Steve, I need the site map from you though to fill that form.
I guess I have one thing that I would encourage, and that is, my guess is, as Duke Energy comes through here, they're probably not going to pick CROA-specific areas because it's not center to town. So if we can already proactively inform the other entities, hey, this is something that we really want to pursue, can you please start funneling things through your facility? So already push it through CDD, push it through, if it's downtown, through Lexon, try and get that type of information. I would assume that Lexon would probably be in support of it because, just because of the proximity, that's where the people come. It's a draw to the community. So I think if we can encourage those other entities, that would be beneficial, rather than all of a sudden going, oh crap, now what?
I can work with Steve just to go over, because it does ask for that in the form, what the site map is. So if we're going to list every entity, then we can certainly get some communication.
Who signs that, Steve?
It's going to have to be me if I'm doing the form.
Or does the board president sign it?
It's a online form that I hit submit.
Representative of the board, probably.
And that's a representative of CROA or CJC?
Well, that was the discussion point of it, because this thing, at first it would have been just CROA.
Well,
and now
if
it's
you want to get it in, probably just CROA right now, and then we'll give a quick update to CJC next week.
Okay, authorized to proceed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you,
Do
Steve.
you
Thank
want
you
to
for
talk
raising
about
that.
the wireless or not, the phones? No? Yes. Okay, one other quick update as to what happened. We had an agenda, or it's on our resolution, is to research and look at 5G. Everybody wants 5G, they want it now. The president wants 6G, and that isn't even a thought. The issue with 5G is the fact that we have a subject matter expert who is actually an engineer in the wireless business that is working with us. He is part of the committee. One of the things that happened is that true 5G, the specification isn't even going to be released until next year. And so part of what, when we're hearing about these tests and all that, they're using 4G LTE Lite. What we have actually done is that when we've done some research within the community and all that, we have inadequate cell service as it is right now as 4G LTE Lite. And so what first has to happen is we need to do a correct and finish the deployment through the community. Because what we're actually facing is that what we have is, it's an issue of health, safety, and protection, and be able for emergency response. Aquila Loop, Artisan Park, and other locations within the community have poor to, sometimes you have to stand on your front porch, and that would not be good to have to call 911. So in doing that, we need to pursue improvement of 4G with the fact that once those improvements are made, those particular sites are going to be the backbone of where the 5G will also fall in on. What we have found is the fact that there is no real way to go back in there and touch these things. One of the issues is that we have to either go through a process of complaint, and that we all complain as users to the individual carriers, and try to work that way. The far extreme, which our expert said, is that we could submit an FCC complaint, which we don't want to do because then that puts us on the negative side of who we want them to come in here. The discussions of having to put in is really to say to put in more towers. The towers aren't going to be 200 feet tall. Technology has changed dramatically. We're going to bring these things back down, but we need to expand the actual coverage and strength within the community. So we are researching this as to what needs to be done with this thing. We're looking at different options. Some of that may be, we may have to, one of them was suggested that we put in the Friday Flash. This is where you can send if you have AT&T, Verizon, or whatever your carrier is, this is how you make a complaint and try to do those particular things. But we may need something from an entity, be it the board, CDD, or whatever, that also sends a formal letter in that says to have them come back in and do a reevaluation of the community, and so that we can have them correct the shortcomings. And so where they're at. The correction would be on them because the services are not adequate, and that's what we need to do.
Now, I think I mentioned this in a previous conversation, Steve Warren. We had a brief conversation after a technology meeting, I think it was back in March, one of the first ones. And I think you said that you've had conversations with a carrier or a tower. Can you refresh that?
Richard Jewson, who lived in Artisan for a while, he was working with one of the providers, and I believe he had some success with getting an additional tower out near I-4.
We had one at the high school.
Near the high school,
Right,
right,
it was
which
at
is
the high
being
school
sucked
property.
off of mostly by those sitting in I-4 traffic. So I've looked in my files. I can't find any information but I know Richard was working with them very closely, so I can see if I can reach out to him and find out any more information. But right now, I don't have any providers to be able to give the technology.
There's two things, because we've actually discussed this in the past about what do we need to do about cell towers, because it's a huge issue. Every single board at one point in time ends up running up against it. My understanding is this is something that really needs to be discussed at a CJC meeting.
Well,
because
TCC ultimately will be, it's not CJC authority, but TCC will have some say depending on where you will put it.
Well, your best access, though, to bring it up, I think, is through the CJC meeting. Since we have one next week, can we, on the 12th, can we please add in there? I know at one point in time there was a conversation that was to put a cell tower here, and it was denied. I'm wondering, though, if now, to your point, Steve, cell technology has evolved.
Right.
I'm wondering if with the newer technology, if now that might be an option, just try and put it in some of our other areas.
Well-
Also out around the athletic complex might be a place to start thinking about too, because you're gonna need stuff out there.
What we found out is, where we generally think that us lay individuals is that there's an open space and we think that it may go in there. That's not really how it works, is the fact that the towers actually they have to be complementary to each other, but they can't interfere with each other because they're operating on the same signal.
It's like two
And so what
microphones
happens
together.
is that they have to be separated to where it's handing off to the next tower, to the next tower, to the next tower. And so, yeah, it may have been ideal to put one right here, but it's already within, the coverage of another tower. That's why we need to have them come back out, do signal site surveys, and figure out where it is that they need to do. If it was possible, and that they can change, the towers as to what they are, because now they look like the giant pole that is down at the high school, but they don't have to be that tall. If they could be stationed on CROA land, that would be wonderful, because guess what? You can lease them the footprint, or other things. But the issue of that is, the first step is we have to contact them, we have an issue, then they need to come out and do the survey, of where we have the shortcomings are at. And then they have to address where to site these. And the issue with this particular thing is that, if we need be, again, it could go to an FCC as to where the developer isn't going to get to say, because this is now an issue of, everybody relies upon this. And I'll give you one other thing. You're talking about Weathermatic, and I'm not sure, Todd, it operates off of cellular, right?
It does.
Okay? Gee whiz, if you don't fix your cellular issue, most of these systems that we're talking about, either the video, Weathermatic, or whatever it is, if you don't have a cellular strength to push the data, okay, you're at the same location. So you gave us a 5G situation, we're addressing that, but we've got to fix what we currently have right now.
I think if we can get a board consensus though, for this really should initiate the CJC, because ultimately TCC is going to have to sign off on anything at all we do, whether we have the cell company come out to do this search. So I would encourage at least dialogue with, can we put it on
Yeah,
the
but
CJC?
the issue with that is it's not a cell company. It is each and all of the vendors, because they each operate on a different frequency band as with their phone and Verizon, AT&T
But
and
we
Verizon
have to
operate.
start one
Yes.
place.
I think what may be better is just for me to shoot an email to Paige and Todd and Henry and see if they have any suggestions on initiating, because from what I understand, you can either hire either the actual cell phone company can come in, buy property, lease property, and put their tower there, or a third party can do it and then lease their services to these different companies.
And in all fairness, I mean, we don't know everything that's going on with Island Village, and it may be in the works, and we might be able to save ourselves headaches.
The issue with that
We
is
don't know.
that Bennett did attend the meeting. Bennett has his concerns. Bennett was also part of that discussion point as to what's going
It
on.
might be below.
Bennett, please, proceed.
Because, and be it the last thing as to where, it's not that we've exhausted everything. We have gone and looked and tried to chase this rabbit in many different ways. The only thing that we have not done, because I am not empowered and I have no money, my allowance is very small from one each household 6, is not to go to a consultant. The minute I pick up the phone or send an email or whatever and say, can you assist, that's incurring a cost of which we do not want to do as at this particular juncture. And we have not done that. But we have a name, we have a location of somebody who does have these contacts, and so, just to let you know that.
Thank you. I think our start though
Okay.
is still.
I took more than 5 minutes, and my apologies to the board.
No problem.
To the issues, thank
I
you.
will,
I have one more item,
go ahead.
not related to Wi-Fi,
Okay.
different subject.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephen.
No, it's not related.
Okay.
In going through the Charter Task Force last week, we discovered that in the bylaws, section 5.3, paragraph 2, says that if a sitting board member is a resident of a service area, that individual shall be made an ex officio member of the board. I live in Artisan Park. I am a homeowner of record, and the Artisan Park Committee is meeting on Wednesday night. I would like the approval of this board to request my ex officio, which means non-voting status, as a member of the Artisan Park Committee in accordance with the bylaws.
I think this went through email, and I appreciate you bringing it up publicly. I think all communication should be public. My only concern or comments would be, and I'm not prepared for this part, but in the charter it also shares, for example, a committee. The chair of a committee cannot be related to somebody that's on the board.
Actually, that's not true. It's only.
Only one.
Only
It's the
one.
Covenants Committee.
Okay, so there's an example.
No, it's the
And-
only one. It's not an example. It is the only one, Kevin. Our ARC is
Take
the
a
only
breath,
committee.
take a
No,
deep breath,
covenants.
because I don't have an issue with this.
Well, yeah,
That's-
you do.
No, I don't. I,
All right,
I
come
just
on,
shared that it was a public comment and not an email conversation behind the public.
Go
I
ahead.
don't
Is
think
that
it's
a concern?
I don't think it's a problem as
I
far
don't-
as relationships
permitted.
go, because, well, David, remember Mark was on,
Rec committee, rec committee.
Covenants.
so I don't think,
Dog
I don't
and
think
he
the
was on dog
relationships
That was
are.
the issue.
It's only the Covenants Committee, and it's, you cannot be related to any Covenant Committee member, none of the board members can.
So, can we relax for a minute? Are you good? You good?
You have the floor. Go ahead.
You tried to grab it back. That was my only comment.
Are we voting?
There's no vote, it's in the bylaws, it's allowed. I just asked to have that publicly stated before it happens,
Go ahead.
because you've gone a year and a half and you haven't done it.
I think
So,
it's.
I'm happy that you're involved.
We just found out about it. We just noticed it, literally while we were reviewing the committee, while we were reviewing it. So I'm totally in support of you on the meeting, announcing on the committee, that you.
You got
are
my
official.
nod on it?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
it's just
Thank
what,
you.
it's what it's expected, it's what the
Yes.
charter
It's what's
says.
in the charter.
And just for clarification, I think the only other service area committee that's fully established right now is Parkview Committee, and there's nobody here that lives in Parkview, is that correct? Okay.
And South Village is trying to set up a committee.
South Village is
And
working
I don't
on
think
it, and I
anyone here
believe
lives in
there's
South
one
Village.
other.
That's the only one that's close to success, right?
Right.
Yeah.
David, anything?
No, I'm just curious why that was in the charter from 20 years ago. I mean, that's just,
It's very weird.
it's weird, but it's there.
It's in there for a reason.
It might be
Yeah,
there
I'm
just
just
as a
curious what
way
the
of
reason is.
identifying the fact that there is indeed a board member that is living in that service area, just as
Yeah,
a,
maybe that's.
yeah,
And there's-
just to highlight
There's
it.
no conflict, that's how
Maybe
it's
as
also
a
on that committee.
liaison
It's-
too.
It shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, for the public record, because in case you're watching this and you don't know what Kevin and I are talking about, my wife is a member of the Artisan Park Committee, elected to that committee last year.
That's all, just as long as I publicly stated and everybody's comfortable and everything's good, that's it. It just shouldn't be an email conversation.
I've
It
got
should
nothing
be
else.
stated publicly.
All right.
I got
Okay.
nothing else.
Motion to
Anybody
Any
else?
last item, or motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Motion.
Thank you.
All in favor, yes.
Thanks. Sorry,
Thank you
I'm a
very
little
much.
late, thank you.
Transcripts, I ran a transcript, an AI transcript.
yeah.
of what's